I never thought I'd be hired to be someone's pretend date for the evening, much less for a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes and GQ at the same time. But there I was, standing in front of Ethan Caldwell, billionaire heir, notorious heartbreaker, and apparently desperate enough to pay a stranger to make it through his father's annual gala. "You clean up well," he said, voice dripping with the kind of confidence people either worshipped or hated. "No one will ever guess you're just here on contract." It should have offended me, but instead, I laughed. Maybe because I needed the money. Maybe because the irony of it all stung. Or maybe because his gray-blue eyes betrayed a flicker of loneliness that no amount of Armani could hide. The Caldwell estate in upstate New York was a cathedral of wealth. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath golden chandeliers, and the guests paraded themselves like ornaments. I could feel eyes on us the second Ethan hooked his arm around mine. His grip was firm, almost too tight, as though I were a lifeline he couldn't afford to lose. "Smile," he whispered through clenched teeth. So I did. And in that moment, for all the staged perfection, something in me shifted. "Remind me," I murmured while we glided through the ballroom. "Why exactly am I the lucky guy you pulled into this charade?" He didn't look at me when he answered. "Because I needed someone who wouldn't fall in love with me." I almost choked on the champagne. "Wow, you must be real fun at dinner parties." That earned the ghost of a smile from him. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was enough to make me realize beneath the arrogance, Ethan Caldwell was cracked, fractured in ways money couldn't mend. As the night wore on, I played my part. I laughed at his jokes, touched his arm at the right times, and leaned in close enough to make the gossip-hungry crowd whisper. And yet, between stolen glances and half-sincere smirks, a dangerous truth brewed inside me. I wasn't just pretending anymore. It didn't help that his facade slipped when no one was watching. When his father approached a man with cold eyes and a voice sharp enough to cut glass, Ethan's whole body tensed. His grip on me tightened again, as if silently begging me not to leave. "Your date," his father sneered. "Charming. Though I suppose hiring company is easier than finding someone who actually cares." The words were meant to humiliate. I felt them burn in Ethan's silence. So I did the only thing that felt right. I laced my fingers through his, and I smiled back at the man who thought he could break his son. "Yes," I said evenly. "His date. And I care more than you'll ever know." Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, stunned, raw, as though I'd just rewritten his entire world in a single sentence. The gala blurred after that. The music swelled. Couples twirled. Glasses clinked. But Ethan remained close. Too close. His carefully constructed walls trembling every time he leaned toward me. "You didn't have to say that," he muttered later, away from prying eyes in a quiet corner of the garden. "Maybe I wanted to," I replied. "Careful," he said, voice low, vulnerable. "You're not supposed to fall for the client." I should have laughed it off. Reminded him that I wasn't here for love, just for a paycheck. But staring at him under the glow of lanterns, I realized I was already in deeper than I wanted to admit. That night, when the last of the guests had gone and the music had faded, Ethan drove me back to the city. Silence filled the car, heavy and suffocating, until finally he spoke. "Don't read too much into tonight," he said. "This was business." I nodded, though my chest ached. "Sure, business." But when he stopped outside my apartment and I reached for the door handle, his hand shot out, catching mine. His eyes met mine with an intensity that almost unraveled me. "Thank you," he whispered. For a moment, I thought he would kiss me. For a moment, I wanted him to, but then he pulled back, and the spell broke. I told myself it was over. A job, nothing more. Yet days later, his name flashed on my phone. One dinner. That's all he asked. One dinner that turned into three. Three that turned into late-night drives. Hushed conversations. And the kind of stolen glances that lit fires I couldn't put out. And every time, he reminded me, this isn't real. But the way he looked at me said otherwise. The truth came crashing down on a rainy Tuesday night. Ethan showed up at my apartment unannounced. Soaked to the bone. Shaking with something I'd never seen in him before: fear. They're trying to take everything from me, he said. Voice breaking. My father. The board. Everyone. I don't know who to trust anymore. And then he looked at me like I was the only safe place he had left. You don't have to trust me, I whispered, pulling him inside. Just stay. He did. And that night, with thunder rumbling outside and his heart beating too fast against mine, Ethan Caldwell stopped pretending. But love built on secrets has sharp edges. And soon, I'd learn that the world he lived in, his empire of power, money, and lies, wasn't ready to let either of us go without a fight. To love Ethan meant stepping into a war I never signed up for. And yet, staring at him in the dim light of my apartment, I knew I'd already chosen my side. Even if it broke me. Ethan didn't sleep that night. I could feel it in the restless way his body shifted beside me. In the tightness of his breath as the storm outside faded into the weak light of dawn. I wasn't supposed to notice this was still business. After all, but when you hold someone through the darkest hours, it stops feeling like a contract. It feels like something you can't name without breaking it. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. They're going to bury me if I don't give them what they want. I turned toward him, heart pounding. Who's they? He sat up, running a trembling hand through his damp hair. My father. The board. Everyone with a stake in Caldwell Enterprises. They want me married to some soulless merger someone polished. Safe. Convenient. Not this. He gestured between us. Bitter. Almost ashamed. Not someone like me. I finished quietly. His eyes locked on mine. Desperate. You don't get it. They'll cut me out. Take everything. And I don't even know if I'd care, except I can't drag you down with me. I pushed myself up, meeting him at eye level. Ethan, you think you're protecting me, but you're not the only one making choices here. He stared, as if I'd just spoken in a language he didn't understand. And maybe I had, because no one had ever dared to stand up to Ethan Caldwell. Not like this. Not as an equal. The following week was a blur of headlines and whispers. Photos of us at the gala surfaced online, splashed across glossy tabloids and financial blogs alike. Caldwell heirs mystery date. The Escort and the Empire. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't know. Offers and threats twisted together like poison. But nothing hit harder than the call from my mother. Sweetheart, she said gently, but I could hear the strain in her voice. I saw the news. Is it true? Are you really with him? I closed my eyes, leaning against the cold kitchen counter. It's complicated, Mom. She hesitated. Complicated doesn't scare me. But be careful. People with that much money, that much power, they don't play fair. I almost laughed. She didn't know the half of it. Ethan tried to shield me. He stopped inviting me to public dinners. He pulled back whenever cameras flashed. But in the shadows, behind locked doors, he clung tighter than ever. It was a dangerous dance, his lips against mine in a penthouse window while the city lights burned below, his whispers filling the spaces where his pride couldn't reach. Yet even in those moments, I felt the storm gathering. His father wasn't going to let this slide. And neither was the board. The confrontation came sooner than either of us expected. It was a Friday evening when Ethan asked me to meet him at his office downtown. I stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor, only to find the air charged with tension. Voices thundered from behind the glass walls of his boardroom. An embarrassment. One man snapped. Parading that boy around like some trophy. Do you understand what this does to investor confidence? Another voice, his father's cut sharper than the rest. You will end this farce, Ethan. Tonight. Or you won't have a company to inherit. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then Ethan's voice, steady but defiant. Maybe I don't want an empire built on your terms. My pulse quickened. The doors flew open. And there he was, face flushed, stormy, every inch of him vibrating with fury. When his father spotted me standing there, his lip curled into a sneer. So this is the distraction, he said. The escort who thinks he can rewrite our legacy. I should have spoken, should have defended myself. But Ethan moved first. He's not a distraction, he said, his voice low and fierce. He's the only thing in my life that's real. The board members shifted uncomfortably. His father's face hardened. Then you've chosen your ruin. And just like that, he walked away, leaving silence in his wake. Ethan slumped against the wall after they left, every ounce of strength draining from him. I rushed to his side. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He interrupted, eyes burning. I'm done pretending. If choosing you means losing everything else, then so be it. My throat tightened. You're insane. Maybe, he whispered, stepping closer. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. His lips found mine before I could argue. Fierce and desperate, tasting of defiance and surrender all at once. And in that moment, I knew we'd crossed a line we could never step back from. But the war had only just begun. In the days that followed, Caldwell Enterprises moved to sideline Ethan, stripping him of authority, smearing his name in the press. Anonymous threats arrived at my door, warning me to walk away while I still could. And yet, the more the world tried to tear us apart, the harder we clung to each other. Why are you still here? Ethan asked one night, his voice breaking as he held me like I was the last solid thing in his life. Because for once, I said, pressing my forehead to his, I want to fight for something that feels like mine. His eyes closed, a single tear slipping free. And when he kissed me then, it wasn't desperation, it was devotion. But love doesn't make the battles disappear. If anything, it paints a target on your back. And as I lay awake that night in Ethan's arms, I realized something terrifying. We weren't just fighting for each other. We were fighting to survive. The first rail crack appeared a week later, when someone leaked private photos of us leaving Ethan's penthouse. The images weren't obscene, just his hand at the small of my back. The kind of touch that screamed intimacy more than words ever could. But the captions twisted everything. Caldwell heirs reckless romance. Escort turned lover. My face was plastered across headlines I had never asked for. Overnight, I went from anonymous to infamous. The kind of fame you couldn't wash off. At the corner store, whispers followed me. At work, my manager pulled me aside with a strained smile and said, maybe it's best if you take some time off. And on the subway, Strangers stared like they could measure my worth in the pages of a tabloid. Ethan's world was bleeding into mine, and it wasn't just inconvenient, it was suffocating. One evening, I showed up at his place, shaking from the weight of it all. He greeted me with a glass of whiskey already in his hand. His jaw set tight. "You saw the headlines," he said. "Not a question. Everyone has." I replied bitterly. "My life isn't built to survive this kind of spotlight, Ethan." He put the glass down and walked toward me, something raw in his eyes. "Then I'll fix it. I'll make them stop." "How?" I demanded. "With money. With lawyers. You can't buy me out of the fact that my entire life has been hijacked." The silence stretched, sharp as glass. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen." "I know," I said softly, voice cracking. "But it did." The fight should have ended there. But Ethan wasn't someone who knew how to lose ground. Days later, he staged a press conference without telling me. I watched from my apartment as he stood at a podium, cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward his face. "This is not a scandal," he said firmly. "This is my life. And yes, I'm seeing someone. His name is—" He paused, and my chest seized. But then he finished. My name spilled into the airwaves like a vow, like a line he'd drawn in the sand. The internet exploded. My phone lit up with texts, some supportive, many cruel. Friends I hadn't heard from in years crawled out of the woodwork, some curious, some hungry for gossip. And my mother's voice cracked over the phone as she whispered, "Are you sure about him? Because you can't put this back once it's out there." I swallowed hard. "I'm not sure about anything. Except him." That night, I showed up at Ethan's door furious. "You had no right to say my name on national television." His face fell. You thought you were protecting me. But you're not the only one with something to lose." He stepped closer, his voice shaking. "I was tired of hiding you. Tired of letting them dictate who I'm allowed to love." And that word love hung between us, dangerous and electric. "Ethan," I whispered, but the rest of my sentence was swallowed when he kissed me, slow and certain, as though he'd been waiting his whole life to finally say it without words. For a while, the chaos outside only tightened the bond between us. We built a cocoon in his penthouse, cooking late-night meals in the sleek kitchen, laughing at bad movies sprawled on leather couches, holding each other so tightly the city seemed to disappear. But the world didn't stay outside. One night, his father showed up unannounced. The air turned icy the second he stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over me like I was dirt tracked onto the carpet. "You think this is sustainable?" He sneered at Ethan. "You think your little rebellion will outlast the storm?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "It's not rebellion. It's my life." His father's eyes narrowed. "Then understand this: if you don't walk away from him, I'll make sure he's destroyed. Not just in the press. I'll bury his name, his career, his future. People like him don't survive wars like this." My breath caught. I wanted to shout, to fight, but Ethan stepped forward like a wall between us. "You won't touch him," he said, his voice low, dangerous. But the threat lingered in the air long after his father left. That night, lying in Ethan's arms, I stared at the ceiling. "He's right," I murmured. "People like me don't survive this world." Ethan's grip tightened. "Then I'll tear this world apart until it makes space for you." I turned to look at him, at the fire in his eyes, and for the first time I realized just how far he was willing to go. And it terrified me. The following weeks blurred into strategy meetings, legal battles, and endless nights where Ethan balanced on the knife's edge between love and war. I watched him fight against his father, against the board, against the weight of expectations that had chained him his entire life. But the more he fought, the more I saw the toll it took. The exhaustion in his eyes, the tremor in his hands when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "You can't burn down everything just to prove a point." His gaze lifted to mine, weary but fierce. "I'm not proving a point. I'm choosing you." I swallowed hard, tears pricking at my eyes. "And if it costs you everything." He smiled faintly, broken but beautiful. "Then everything wasn't worth having." The war raged on outside, but inside, we clung to the fragile, stubborn love we'd built. Nights became softer, more tender, his kisses slower, his laughter freer. He let me see him not the heir, not the fighter, but the boy who'd been taught all his life that he wasn't allowed to want what he wanted. And in those moments, I knew, no matter what came, no matter how sharp the knives waiting in the dark, I wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. The night the war reached its peak, Ethan's world collapsed in a single phone call. We were curled up on his couch, the city glittering beneath us, when his phone lit up with his lawyer's name. He answered, tense, and within seconds his expression hardened. "They're calling an emergency vote," he said after hanging up. "My father wants me removed from the board. Permanently." My stomach dropped. Can he do that? He owns enough shares. And with the board behind him, he'll paint me as reckless, unfit. Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead. "They're going to erase me." I reached for him instinctively. "Then fight. Don't let him decide your life." His eyes met mine, stormy and searching. "Would you still want me if I lost it all?" The answer came before I even thought about it. "Yes, because I never wanted the empire, I wanted you." For a moment, the steel in his eyes softened, and then he kissed me, fierce and trembling, like a man clinging to the last thing he had left. The vote was set for Friday. Until then, we lived in a pressure cooker of uncertainty. Ethan spent days with lawyers, advisors, and a lice if they could even be called that. At night, he came home to me, and for a few precious hours, he let the armor fall. He cooked pasta badly, cursed at old video games, and fell asleep with his head in my lap, looking less like a billionaire heir and more like the boy he'd never been allowed to be. But the storm kept creeping closer. On Thursday night, he came home later than ever, his tie loosened, his face pale. "They're using you," he whispered as he sank onto the couch. "They've built a narrative that I'm reckless, that I've been manipulated by someone after my money. They're dragging your name through the mud to get to me." I froze. "What are they saying?" "That you're nothing but an escort who got too ambitious." His voice cracked. "They're calling you a con." The words stung, but not because they weren't familiar. I'd heard worse before. They stung because of the way Ethan's voice broke around them, as though it hurt him more than it hurt me. "Let them talk," I said, steadying my voice. "We know the truth." He looked at me like I was the only anchor he had left. "I don't deserve you." "You don't have to," I whispered, leaning in. "Just let me stand with you." Friday came like a guillotine. The boardroom was cold, lined with men and women in sharp suits, their eyes gleaming with judgment. Ethan stood at the head of the long oak table, a storm barely contained beneath his tailored suit. I sat quietly at the back, unwelcome but unwilling to leave. His father sat opposite him, calm and calculating. "Ethan, this isn't personal," he said, voice smooth as poison. "It's business. You've let your distractions compromise your judgment. Caldwell Enterprises cannot afford to be tainted by scandal." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You mean you can't stand that I won't live by your rules?" Murmurs rippled through the room. His father leaned forward. "You've had every privilege, every opportunity, and this is what you do. Throw it away for some nobody." The words sliced through the air. I felt heat rise in my chest, shame warring with fury. But Ethan didn't flinch. "He's not a nobody," Ethan said, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "He's the only reason I've remembered what it feels like to be human. And if that makes me unfit in your eyes, then maybe I don't want your empire." Gasps echoed. The board members shifted uneasily. His father's face went pale with rage. "You arrogant child," he spat. "You'd throw away generations of legacy for him." Ethan glanced back at me then, just for a moment, and in his eyes I saw something unshakable. "Yes," he said simply. The vote was swift. Too swift. When the hands went up, one after another, felt like the room was tilting. Ethan's father controlled enough shares to secure the majority. By the end, Ethan's title, his power, his empire, all of it was stripped away. The board filed out, murmuring about markets and futures, leaving devastation in their wake. His father lingered only long enough to deliver the final blow. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. "When he leaves you, when you have nothing left, you'll remember this moment." And then he was gone. Ethan stood there, staring at the empty seats, his hands trembling at his sides. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might break. But then he turned to me, and though his eyes were shattered, there was something else beneath the wreckage: relief. "It's over," he whispered, across the room, taking his hand in mine. "Not for us." He looked at me like I just handed him the world. And in a way, maybe I had. That night, we left the penthouse. We walked through the city like ordinary people. No chauffeurs, no security. Just two men who had lost everything and found each other. We ended up at a little diner on the corner. Greasy fries and cheap coffee between us. Ethan laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks. And the sound made my chest ache with something brighter than hope. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted, his hair a mess, his tie shoved in his pocket. "Neither do I," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "But maybe that's the point." He smiled, soft and real, and in that moment, stripped of everything his world had built around him, Ethan Caldwell had never looked freer. And I realized something I hadn't dared to before. Losing everything didn't break him. It gave him back his life. And maybe, just maybe, it gave us a chance at ours. That autumn, when golden leaves began to carpet the familiar streets, our lives had already taken a completely new turn. Ethan was no longer the Caldwell heir bound by a corporate empire. And I was no longer the secret lover whispered about in tabloids. We were simply ourselves. In the first month after walking away from the board, Ethan became almost unrecognizably in the best way. He sold off several luxury apartments and moved into a modest place in Brooklyn. It had a sunlit rooftop, the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the cafe downstairs, and neighbors friendly enough to drop off pastries at our door. I never thought standing in line for fresh bread would make me happy. Ethan laughed one breezy morning, his hair tousled, holding a paper bag still warm in his hands. I slipped an arm around him. That's because, this time, you're actually living. Those days were achingly simple, and yet my heart trembled with every moment. Ethan learned to cook, with chaotic results at first. I'll never forget the day he set an entire pan of eggs on fire, smoke filling the kitchen. But instead of getting frustrated, he broke down laughing until tears streamed from his eyes. Maybe I should open a smokehouse instead of a cafe, he joked. I laughed so hard I thought I'd split in half. And in that moment, I realized Ethan, the man who once lived behind glass walls of power, could now laugh freely like a child. Of course, the past didn't vanish overnight. The press kept digging. Social media kept whispering. And a few old friends turned their backs. Sometimes I'd find him on the rooftop, staring into the distance, his father's shadow still a wound that refused to close. I'm scared I made a mistake, he murmured one night, that I let too many people down. I cupped his face, forcing his eyes to meet mine. You don't owe them anything. You only owe yourself your own happiness. If you had stayed in that golden cage, you would have been dying a little more each day. Now, you're finally free. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and then he smiled the warmest smile I had ever seen. A year later, we opened something of our own, a little cafe library, where people could sip coffee while reading books. Ethan named it Chapter 1. Because this is the first chapter of us, he said, squeezing my hand as the sign went up. The cafe grew more popular than we expected. Not just because of the good coffee or the curated shelves, but because Ethan himself stood behind the counter not as a cold executive, but as a man who smiled, who listened, who lived. Sometimes people recognized him. The Caldwell heir, the fallen prince of a dynasty. But instead of mocking, they only nodded, as if acknowledging that Ethan had finally found where he belonged. On our 2-year anniversary, Ethan led me to a riverside park under a clear night sky. He was so nervous I couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong with you? You look like a student about to take an exam, I teased. He swallowed hard, then pulled out a small box. When he opened it, the simple silver ring inside caught the glow of the streetlights. My breath caught. I don't have much left to give, Ethan said, voice shaking but steady at the same time. But if you'll have me, I'll be your home, your anchor, your partner forever. My heart stopped, then surged. Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, laughing and crying all at once. Yes, God, yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed me under the stars. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a fairy tale. This was our life. As I write these words, 3 years have passed. Chapter 1 has become a haven for book lovers, for dreamers, for anyone who needs a quiet place to breathe. Ethan grows roses on the rooftop. I write short stories to tuck into corners of the shop for customers to find. We still get looks sometimes, whispers we can't quite ignore. But whenever that happens, we only smile at each other, because we know, let the world think what it wants. We have this love untouchable, unshakable, ours. I think back to that first night, when Ethan hired me to play his escort at a glittering gala. I never imagined that from that single role, I'd find myself bound to a man so complicated, so proud, and yet so heartbreakingly lonely. Now, after every storm, I understand, true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding the one willing to walk with you through every imperfection. Ethan once asked me, if I lost everything, would you still choose me? And now, as I glance at the ring shining on my hand, I finally whisper my answer. I wouldn't just choose you when you've lost everything. I choose you every single day because you are everything to me. And so, in a world too vast to ever hold still, we go on writing our story, a story that doesn't begin with luxury, doesn't end with loss, but lives in the quiet, ordinary days, in laughter, in love, in the unwavering grip of two hands holding tight. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.